American family, you know what I mean? Yeah, getting by. You know, they didn't have tons of money or nothing.
12 by 12 room. I think this is one of the things
was an familial thing. It was this wasn't
Last week I told you about 16 children rescued from a house in Vinton County, Ohio. I told you about the 12 by 12 room, the conditions that made investigators put on masks just to walk through the door, the 4 adults charged with child endangerment, the Attorney General who walked out of that house and called it pure evil. 379 of you watched that video in the first 7 days, and dozens of you left comments asking the same question. Why did it take so long? How did nobody know? This week I have answers, and they are worse than anything in my first video, because here is what investigators have confirmed since last week. The raid on that house in Hamden, Ohio, the search that rescued 16 children, was not about the children at all. Police were not there for a welfare check. They were not responding to a tip about abuse. They did not know those children existed when they knocked on that door. They were there for something else entirely. Today I'm covering every new development in the Vinton County child endangerment case. The real reason police entered that house, the grandfather who is already out of custody, the family member who is speaking publicly for the first time, and the detail about Elizabeth Siders that every major news outlet is now investigating. A detail that raises a question nobody has fully answered yet. Was she a defendant, or was she also a victim? If you watched my first video, thank you. If this is your first time here, subscribe before we go any further, because this is exactly the kind of story this channel exists for. Let me take you back to the morning of June 30th, 2026. The morning that changed everything for 16 children in Hamden, Ohio. Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson stood in front of cameras the following day and confirmed something that had not been widely reported. He said, and I want to be precise here, that when investigators arrived at that house on Omer Street, they were there for an unrelated investigation. Quote, "It wasn't about the welfare of these 16 kids. At that point, we didn't know that there was going to be 16 kids there." He added that the parallel investigation had been running for approximately a month to 6 weeks before the raid. So what was that investigation? Court records newly obtained by news outlets this week reveal the answer. Gary Siders Jr., the 36-year-old father of the children, had been charged separately with 4 counts of public indecency. The incidents were dated May 23rd, May 27th, May 29th, and May 31st of 2026. The arrest warrant for those charges was dated June 30th, the same day investigators executed the search warrant on Omer Street, and found 16 children living in conditions that defied comprehension. Let that sit for a moment. The investigation that led to the rescue of 16 children from a house of horrors was not triggered by a welfare concern, a tip about child abuse, or a CPS referral. It was triggered by a public indecency investigation into the father. And when investigators walked through that door, they had no idea what they were about to find, which means the question your comments were asking last week, how did nobody know? Now has a very specific, very disturbing answer. Nobody was looking. Not for the children, not for the conditions, not for what was happening inside that 12 by 12 room, not until an unrelated investigation accidentally opened the right door. I want to address something that generated significant reaction in the comments of my first video. Several of you asked about Gary Siders Sr., the 73-year-old grandfather, the oldest of the 4 defendants, and what was happening with his case. As of July 8, 2026, Gary Siders Sr. is out of custody. Here is what happened. Siders Sr. was due to appear at a bond hearing in the days following his arraignment. On the way to that hearing, he fell. Tests following the fall revealed an undisclosed serious medical condition. Vinton County Prosecutor William Archer confirmed at a press conference this week that Siders Sr. required care at a facility outside the county. And because he was in county custody at the time, the county would have been financially responsible for that care. Judge Lena Fetheroff Rogers released him on a recognizance bond, meaning he did not have to post the $300,000 that had been set at his arraignment. He was released for medical reasons. Gary Siders Sr. faces 16 counts of child endangerment, a second-degree felony in Ohio, each carrying up to 12 years. He was one of 4 adults in that house. He is 73 years old. He has an undisclosed serious medical condition. And he is not in a jail cell. He is not permitted to have contact with the other defendants or the victims. His whereabouts are subject to the conditions of his release, but he is free. Prosecutor Archer, to his credit, addressed this directly. He acknowledged the community's concern. He said the legal mechanism that allowed the release was standard procedure given the medical circumstances, and that the charges against Siders Sr. remain fully in place. But the families of those 16 children and the community of Hamden, Ohio, know that the oldest defendant in this case is not behind bars tonight. And that is a fact that deserves to be named. But it is what investigators confirmed about Elizabeth Siders this week, a detail that goes back nearly 20 years that changes how you understand this entire family, and how you understand every system that was supposed to protect the children inside that house. Stay with me, now. I need you to stay with me for the next section, because what I'm about to tell you about Elizabeth Siders is the detail that every major news outlet in Ohio picked up this week. It is the detail that changes how you understand this entire case. And it is the detail that raises a question investigators have not yet answered. It starts nearly 20 years ago. In West Virginia, with a 15-year-old girl and a marriage license, Elizabeth Siders is 33 years old. She is one of 4 adults charged with 16 counts of child endangerment in Vinton County, Ohio. She is the mother of the children who were rescued from that house. But here is what ABC 6 investigates confirmed this week from court records. In 2008, nearly 20 years ago, Elizabeth Siders was 15 years old when she married Gary Siders Jr., who was 18 at the time. The marriage took place in Mason County, West Virginia. A circuit court judge granted the marriage license. 2 months after that license was approved, the oldest child in this case was born. The next child was born when Elizabeth was 16 years old. West Virginia family law attorney Amanda Alexander, speaking to ABC 6 this week, explained what the law looked like in West Virginia in 2008. She said, and I'm paraphrasing from her confirmed statements, that at the time there was no minimum age to marry in West Virginia. A 15-year-old could legally wed with the consent of her parents. She also noted that a judge had the power to stop that marriage, even if the law did not require a court investigation. That judge did not stop it. West Virginia lawmakers attempted to tighten those laws in 2023. The final measure stopped short of a full ban, setting the minimum age at 16 with parental and court consent, and requiring the age gap between spouses to be no more than 4 years. The gap between a 15-year-old Elizabeth and an 18-year-old Gary Siders Jr. would not have met that standard. Ohio also allows underage marriage, currently with a minimum age of 17 with parental and court approval. A bill at the Ohio State House would raise that minimum to 18 with no exceptions. That bill has passed committee. It has not yet been set for debate on the Senate floor, now. Here is the question that investigators have not yet answered, and that I think this community needs to sit with rather than rush past. Was Elizabeth Siders a perpetrator in this case? Or was she also in some way a victim of it? A relative of the Siders family, Ronnie Fletcher, who says he is married into the family, spoke publicly this week for the first time. He described Elizabeth as having had a difficult home life before the marriage. He said she had, in his words, escaped into the Siders family. He said the family was back then a normal American household. West Virginia attorney Amanda Alexander went further, and her words deserve to be heard carefully. She said she sees broader failures in cases like this. She asked, did Elizabeth receive prenatal care as a minor? How many children did she have while she was still a child herself? Did Job and Family Services look into it at that point? And then she said, so we didn't get to the point that there were 16 children living in the basement. Those are the questions of a lawyer looking at a system that failed, not once, not twice, but at every possible intervention point across nearly 2 decades. Vinton County Sheriff Ryan Kane was asked directly this week whether investigators believe Elizabeth Siders may also be a victim. His answer, that is all still part of the ongoing investigation at this time. We can't continue on that. That is not a denial. That is an investigation still in progress. I am not going to tell you whether Elizabeth Siders is guilty or innocent. That is for a court to determine. What I am going to tell you is this. A 15-year-old girl was legally married to an 18-year-old man in a state with no minimum marriage age. She was pregnant 2 months later. She was a mother at 15. And 18 years after that, she is one of 4 people charged with endangering the children she began having as a child herself. That is not an excuse, but it is a fact. And it is a fact that no headline has given adequate space to this week. If this is the first video of mine you have watched, this is what this channel does. We take the cases that the news cycle moves on from too quickly and we go deeper. We sit with the questions nobody wants to answer. If that is the kind of reporting you want, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because this case is not over, and we will be here every time it moves. And then, a member of this family spoke publicly for the first time this week. What he said adds a layer to this case that no official source has provided. And it raises a question the prosecutors still have not addressed, about how a family that was once described, as normal became what investigators found on Omer Street. Ronnie Fletcher is, by his own description, married into the Siders family. He says it has been approximately 7 years since he knew an exact address for the Siders family. He agreed to speak to reporters this week, and what he said adds a layer to this case that no official source has provided. He described the family as a normal American home in its earlier years. He said Elizabeth had a difficult home life before she and Gary Jr. got together, and that she had, in his word, escaped into the Siders family. He said he was horrified by what investigators found on Omer Street. He said the family he knew was not the family that was described in those press conferences. Now, I want to be careful here. Ronnie Fletcher is not an investigator. He is not a prosecutor. He has not seen the inside of that house. And he has not lived alongside this family for 7 years. His perspective is partial. It is one data point in a case that is still assembling its full picture, but it matters for one specific reason. It tells us that the deterioration of this household, whatever it looked like at its worst, was not always visible. Not even to family. Not even to people who should have had a reason to look. The Siders family moved. Repeatedly. Between Gallia County, Jackson County, Pike County in Ohio. Connections to Wisconsin. 4 years in Hamden on Omer Street, a street where neighbors told investigators they barely knew children lived there at all. A family that moved. A father with a public indecency record. A mother who was a child bride. A grandfather who is now out on medical release. And 16 children who had never been enrolled in school, never been to a doctor, never existed in any government record. At every point where the system could have intervened, someone would have needed to be looking. Nobody was looking. Let me give you a clear picture of exactly where this case stands as of July 9, 2026. All 4 defendants, Gary Siders SR, Christina Siders, Gary Siders Jr., and Elizabeth Siders, have pleaded not guilty. These are charges, not convictions. The legal process is in its earliest stages. All 4 had court-appointed attorneys assigned to them in the days following their arraignment. The attorney for Gary Siders SR, Dorian Keith Baum, released a statement asking the public to let the process play out. He noted, correctly, that as of the time of his statement, not even an indictment had been formally filed. Only a complaint, and then an amended complaint containing 1 fewer count than the original. He described it as the extremely preliminary stage of the case. He is right that it is preliminary, but preliminary does not mean unserious. Each of the 4 defendants faces 16 second-degree felony counts of child endangerment in Ohio, each count carrying up to 12 years in prison. The cumulative exposure is significant. The 4 suspects have been ordered to have no contact with each other or with the victims. Gary Siders SR is on a recognizance bond with medical conditions attached. The other 3 remain in custody at the Southeastern Ohio Regional Jail as of this recording. The 16 children are in the temporary custody of the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services. Some were treated and released from hospital. Others were transferred to elevated medical care, and as of the most recent update available, at least 1 child remained hospitalized in serious condition. The investigation is ongoing. The Ohio BCI tip line remains active. Investigators are still examining the full scope of what happened inside that house, how long, in exactly what conditions, and what additional charges may follow. Prosecutor Archer has said publicly that more charges are possible. The Ohio Attorney General's office has not yet responded to questions about whether the public indecency charges against Gary Siders Jr. were the specific trigger for the June 30th raid. That connection, confirmed in court documents, has not been officially characterized by the state. But the timeline speaks for itself. The arrest warrant for those public indecency charges was dated June 30th. The search warrant on Omer Street was executed on June 30th. The 16 children were found on June 30th. The case that saved 16 lives was, by every available indication, not designed to do that. I want to spend a few minutes on the questions this new wave of reporting has opened up, because I think they are more important than any single update. The first question is about Elizabeth Siders. Is she a defendant, a victim, or both? The sheriff says it is still under investigation. The marriage license is confirmed. The age is confirmed. The pregnancies as a minor are confirmed. But whether the law will treat her differently because of that history, that is not yet known. And it matters enormously. The second question is about the marriage laws. West Virginia had no minimum marriage age in 2008. A circuit court judge approved a marriage license for a 15-year-old. Ohio's current minimum is 17. The bill that would raise it to 18 is sitting in committee. If that bill had been law in 2008, would any of this have looked different? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a legislative one. And the answer is, we will never know. The third question is about Gary Siders SR. He faces 16 felony counts. He is 73 years old. He has an undisclosed medical condition. He is not in custody. The legal mechanism for his release was standard, but standard mechanisms and just outcomes are not always the same thing. The families of those 16 children are watching. And the fourth question, the one that sits underneath all of this, is the same question that opened this case and has not been answered by any of the new reporting. How do 16 children live in a house for 4 years, in a village of 800 people? And nobody, in any official capacity, knows they are there. A public indecency case accidentally found them. If that investigation had not existed, if Gary Siders Jr. had not attracted that specific kind of attention in May 2026, would anyone have knocked on that door? The Attorney General said 24 more hours and we would likely have been dealing with deaths if there had been no public indecency investigation. No warrant. No knock on the door on June 30th. How much longer would those 16 children have waited? I said in my first video that the question of how those children remained invisible was the most important question this case leaves behind. This week's reporting has answered part of it. Not because the system worked, but because a completely unrelated investigation accidentally opened the right door at the right moment. That is not a system working. That is luck. And 16 children should not owe their rescue to luck. The children are out of that house. They are alive. Some are recovering. Some are still in hospital. They are being cared for the first time in many of their lives by people whose job it is to care for them. Gary Siders SR is out of custody for medical reasons. Gary Siders Jr. faces child endangerment charges and public indecency charges. Christina Siders and Elizabeth Siders remain in custody. And Elizabeth Siders, who was herself a 15-year-old child when this family began, is awaiting a legal process that has not yet determined whether she is a perpetrator, a victim, or both. This case is not over. It is barely beginning. I will be back with updates as this investigation develops. If you are following this case and you are not subscribed, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because this story is going to keep moving. And if you have information about the Siders family, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, anywhere, the Ohio BCI tip line is 855-224-6446. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And after last week's video, I know this community has things to say. I'll see you in the next one.